blow on us, and then we have Pentecost, and then we'll be in a whole new season. So as we think about this, we decided to get into this passage, but before we get right into the passage, so last Sunday, Josh preached, and last weekend was like a cultural event that was meaningful to my family, and Josh was sharing with you about how we messed around with AI a little bit, and sent our family this lovely picture of Josh and Ari at Derby Day in Kentucky, which they were not. We had a very fun exchange about it. And then, because of that, I got some questions after church, like, what was it like growing up in Kentucky? What was it like for a Derby? And the Derby was, in fact, a big part of my childhood. I've never actually been to Derby, but we do watch it every year as like a family event. And last week, did you ever see this race? It was, very. Let me just tell you, it's a good 3 minutes to go back and watch. It was very dramatic. It was very dramatic. Golden Tempo is the horse who came from the back to win the Derby, and his brother, this is him reaching out because his brother, Jose Ortiz's brother, was the jockey next to him who he beat at the last minute. Who congratulated him on a beautiful run. It was just a beautiful moment. The trainer, Sharima, the first female trainer that Kentucky Derby. Shout out to her on this day. Her kids' video. It's beautiful. It is a beautiful moment, and I mean, whatever you think about horse racing. But I did get this question, like, what was that like? And I will say, I mean, I grew up out to Louisville, and a lot of you heard me tell stories about growing up in the farm. But the other piece of that is that, like, horse culture was just all around. And we would have this whole lead up to the Derby where we would have, I mean, we would make special crafts in elementary school. We learned songs that we sang together, not just the old Kentucky home, but there were other songs. And there were all these, like, entrapments, right? But one of the things that always stands out to me that I always still look for is the hats, right? So if you're familiar with this, all the hats are a big deal. And this picture, actually, is particularly time, but this is a picture of a woman from my hometown who stands out as one of the kindest figures from my childhood. Her name is Patty Eddington, and she is infamous because she is the Derby hat lady. Like, she has these specialty hats made every year. This one's from a while back, but I grabbed a few more pictures from the last few years with her daughter and one with her son, Ashley, there. And Ashley is part of the reason I wanted to tell this story because Ashley's my good friend growing up. This was us at our senior like awards night kind of thing. Which I was exactly the same. That's right, better. But to understand what kind of friend, we were actually having a really fun text exchange yesterday because he remembers way more about high school than I do. But he was like, remember that when we did that project together on Upton Sinclair's The Jungle, in which everybody reads in high school, it's like visual. I did not remember this, but he remembered that we put together an incredible mixtape that included Aerosmith's Welcome to the Jungle as part of our presentation. And I would say that's all you need to know about what we were like. But I want to dig back a little more. I don't have pictures of this, but in middle school, you got really dig to find pictures in middle school, and they're probably all burned. I don't really know. This is before digital images. But in middle school, Ashley was like the guy I could count on to save me a seat at lunch every day. This is a big deal in middle school. And not only that, but he would bring his lunch, and his mom, Patty, again, one of the most generous figures in my childhood, she would always send a nutty bar in his lunch. And if you don't remember what these are, they are no longer called nutty bars. They're now, for some inexplicable reason, called nutty buddies. We have no idea why. But at any rate, if you know what this is, there's two in the package, right? There's two in the package. And so often, Ashley would share one of those with me at lunch. And that's what you need to know about the kind of friend he was. Josh shared last week that the stories we live by shape our actions. Right? The stories we live by shape what we do from day to day. And so our question for today is, what's the story that we're living by? What's that story? In this series, we've been looking through 1 Peter, writing to these chosen strangers in the world, these immigrants, these people who perhaps as American creation have been sort of moved from one community to another. They're looking for their place, their home. And the world appears us to look ahead because you've been born into a new kind of family and a living hope. And our story that we're trying to live by here, it's what it means to live in this living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead. That though we've never seen him, we love him. And even though we don't see him now, we trust him. And for me, giving this glorious joy, that's our inheritance. That's our inheritance, as Aaron reminded us. And we're being saved from a bad story, cynicism, addiction, from all the things that might give us a hopeless kind of story. And as Andrew shared with us from Emily Dickinson, to tell all the truth but tell it slant. He took us back to Jesus' resurrection story on the Emmaus Road, where he's walking with his disciples and he's talking to them, and they're not quite getting it. And then the truth, sort of, their eyes are open. It's great to them. And sometimes we tell the truth a little bit slant. We don't quite get the story. And it has to come together for us in my spirit. And so that brings us to today's passage from 1 Peter 3. And I'm going to read this for us. Who is going to harm you if you're eager to do good? And even if you should suffer for what is right, you are blessed. Do not fear their threats. Do not be frightened. But in your hearts, revere Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give a reason for the hope that you have. But do this with gentleness and respect, keeping a clear conscience, so that those who speak maliciously against your good behavior in Christ may be ashamed of their slander. For it is better, if it is God's will, to suffer for doing good than for doing evil. For Christ also suffered once for sins, the righteous for the unrighteous, to bring you to God. He was put to death in the body, but made alive in the spirit. This is the word of the Lord. First Peter is a letter. It's a letter written to people who are facing persecution of some sort. We don't know all the details of that, but we know that Peter is bringing us just suffering again and again. This question of like you're facing some sort of suffering or trial. And these are people who are living under the crush of the Roman Empire. We know that part. We know that the worst crime of early Christians was disloyalty to the empire. It was disloyalty to that particular kind of story, that particular kind of good news. And Peter connects their lives with the ancestors, Abraham and Sarah, as these kind of wandering exiles who are maybe misunderstood and sometimes mistreated, and tells them, but you're in this new family because of Jesus. And so there's a paradox here that somehow suffering refines your faith. That somehow suffering ends up being a good part of the story. And that, as Aaron reminded us, it's kind of weird and uncomfortable, and we don't love that part. But we also know we live in a difficult day ourselves. And we live in a day when disloyalty to the empire can be crushing. And the empire comes to crush those who are simply trying to live. Last night we had an event for our Immigration Resource Center. It was a time of storytelling and a time to raise money. And we got to see the gifts of a local artist who was painting his story. We got to hear Pastor Cecilia's story. Many of you know Pastor Cecilia Santana, who is a longtime friend of Mountainside. Mountainside and her church used to rent space together over in the basement of the Methodist church, and then when he moved over here, eventually they needed a new place too, and Cecilia talked with us about worshiping in his space. So her congregation worships here in the afternoons on Sunday as well. But she shared her own story, and many of you know, even just a couple of months ago, she, through working with the IRC, was able to receive her formal status and a work permit. And this is a long, 30-something-year journey. And we're so grateful for that work through the IRC. And she also shared just about the power of Jesus and healing in her life. And God's Spirit working and healing her from so much pain and trauma. It's a good story. I also have a few numbers to report. So there were over 200 guests, which was incredible. We had 25 new Justice Circle members last night, which means people who committed to give every month to the work of the IRC, which is incredible. 8 Justice Circles increased their gifts, and we raised over $20,000. So it's very exciting. Yeah, Josh was saying even just a couple of years ago, our goal was like $7,500. So we're so grateful for the generosity. And folks who want to be part of this story, helping people find hope. And find a way forward in the midst of this moment in this empire. And Peter says, don't fear. Don't fear this kind of power. Don't fear this kind of oppression. I was reminded that last year I also preached on Mother's Day. Thank you, Josh, for always gifting me with Mother's Day. And this assignment was actually way easier. Last year I had to preach on Revelation, which was so weird to talk about on Mother's Day. But I was looking back, and I was reminded also that it was just after the Papal Conclave and the new Pope had been chosen. And while we are not all Catholic in this room, though shout out to the Howards, I was in Howards today. But this powerful, very important religious leader across the globe. And it's been so interesting to watch Pope Leo in particular as he kind of interacts with different powers that be. And recently he got in a little bit of a tricky spot with the president of this nation for some of the ways that he was speaking out. And he had something to say about that. He said, I will not shy away from announcing the message of the gospel. And invited all people to look for ways of building bridges of peace and reconciliation, and looking for ways to avoid war anytime that's possible. I'm not afraid of the Trump administration or speaking out loudly about the message of the gospel, which is what the church works for. He's clear about what he's called to. He's clear about his message, and he's not afraid when that message comes up against other powers in the world, and powers that make war, and powers that cause suffering. And that sounds a lot like 1 Peter. Do not fear their threats. Do not be frightened, But in your hearts, revere Christ, or Christ as Lord. Christ as Lord. And be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you, to give the reason for the hope that you have, but do this with gentleness and respect. I want to spend some time on this part of the passage because I think we all have a lot of be prepared to give a reason. And I feel like for me, this used to look like pressure. This used to look like fear. I mean, I had some like fear around this. It used to look like not being prepared, but being certain. Like being so certain that you're right. And you understand this whole thing better than anybody else. That you can tell someone else that they're wrong. And somehow convince them to become right and certain like you. And that maybe was a surprise to some of us that's not good news to everybody. And so then it got a little more complicated. And so I want to dig into this a little bit more about maybe being certain is missing the point. One of the things I do in my day job is research, and my research focuses on young people and their formation. And one of the things that we've learned over the past couple of decades of researching adolescents and their own faith journeys and their journeys of identity and belonging and purpose is that doubt is a really important part of the faith journey for so many people. That doubt and struggle, in fact, are necessary for faith for many of us. Some of us have a gift of really strong faith. Some of us have a spiritual gift of faith. And we just like have this confidence, right? And in others of us, it's more complicated. And we doubt more than we believe. And we wonder whether that's wrong or sinful. And one of the things we've learned is that it's not actually doubt that's toxic to faith, it's silence. It's silence. And that in our research, young people who share and have a safe place to talk about their doubts and their questions and their struggles actually tend to have a stronger faith than those young people who are silent and do not feel like they have a safe place to voice those questions. And one of the things I love about this particular community is that we create that space for questions. I'm going to start with our children when the gifts of godly play is wondering. And it's freedom to wonder about what the passage, what these stories have to say to us, what might be going on. And creating that space for kids to kind of wonder out loud. And we try to foster that love for our youth ministry as well, because the more we kind of work it out, it turns out, often the more we believe. I met once with a group of high schoolers from a Christian school, and we were kind of talking about this, how sometimes questions are part of our formation. And they shared about an assignment that a teacher had given them to talk with someone who self-identified as either a non-Christian or a non-churchgoer. And the assignment was to ask if they would be open to sharing which Christian beliefs or Bible passages were most troubling to them. What are you bothered by? And here was the trick, is that they were going to have these conversations, and they asked the question, they let the people talk, and then their response was, thank you for sharing. And that's all they were allowed to say. They were not to explain anything, they were not to try to convince anyone, they were not to try to talk it out, but just to say thank you for sharing. And the students shared with me that their most important discovery in that assignment was how powerful it was to actually listen to someone. And to listen to someone who has a different perspective. And just respect where they are. Not only did they learn more than if they tried to get some sort of response, but the more the other person realized that they were really actually there to listen, the more they shared. And that they felt the more they heard from people about their perspectives. And I think there's a good lesson there. Because how we share the story matters. How we share our stories matters. I've shared this before, but one of the coolest things about running a marathon for me is the support along the route. And then people who show up with their signs, sometimes people you know, but also total strangers. And I remember last year's experience of running past this sign. Someone was just holding out for 20,000 strangers and probably 2 people she knew. And it said, remember when you thought you couldn't do this. And I almost started weeping right there. Which is not good because it's still like the first half. Shout out to Josh, by the way, who ran a half marathon yesterday. I loved it. So excited. But the worst part of running the marathon, other than the pain, is the people out there representing Jesus in ways that are really painful. And it's happened to me this year, where I felt like it was early in the course, like mile 5, and you're feeling good, and you're like, this is going to be the best day, this is going to be the best race, and then you turn this corner, and there's these guys with bullhorns shouting, "You are a dirty, rotten sinner! The wages of sin is death." And shouting, it was all bad news. And I'm just not sure anybody who was out there ready to have their best race was in the mood to be convinced by bad news, to change their lifestyle, and to turn to Jesus and believe this message. Because this message is you are a terrible person, and you're going to burn in hell. And I just wonder if maybe they're missing the moment a little bit. They're missing the timing. And part of why I shared this story again is because you might have heard another story recently that came out of the Boston Marathon. Maybe it's only runners who pay attention to these things. There's this guy named Jay, and he was just within sight of the finish line of the Boston Marathon. And by the way, if you don't know, to get into the Boston Marathon, you have to run a really fast time. So you are a really good athlete. And so this guy's there, he earned his spot, right? And he's out there trying to have his best race. And he's within 300 feet of the finish line. And he just collapses. He falls his legs just collapse. And if you watch this video, you just feel so much pain. And he gets up, and he falls down again. And he gets up, and he falls down again. And the 4th time, he just collapses. And then, the guy named Aaron, who's also out trying to have his personal best marathon, within sight of the finish line, makes a choice. And he runs over and he reaches down and he picks it up. You gotta watch this video. And he's having a hard time trying to get it off the ground. And then another guy comes and decides at the last minute. Another guy who's about to beat his own personal record at the Boston Marathon, which nobody gets into. And he comes over and helps. And these guys get it. You don't have to like running to know that these guys are living a good story. It's a beautiful story. Just about kindness and goodness. And AJ said afterwards in the interview, when I saw Aaron reach his arms out, it meant the world to me. I still can't believe that they even stopped to help and got me through those last few years. It's a good story. So I'm thinking about storytelling, right? And how do we get these good stories? Sometimes it's just like it hits us in the moment. And we just decide to live that goodness, to live that hope. I don't know if these guys were motivated by the goodness of Jesus Christ and the gospel, but I would say that's a gospel moment, right? This generosity, this sacrifice, this beauty. It did, of course, make me think of Taylor Swift. Yeah. And this week, if you didn't see or hear, she doesn't give interviews classically like the last 7 years or so, but she did give an interview recently with the New York Times. It's worth a listen. It's a 30-minute recorded interview. It's really cool. But I was listening to it through these like insights of storytelling. So arguably, she's one of the best storytellers of our time. And whether you like her music or not, it's fine. And I was thinking about this, like giving a reason, right? For the story to tell. Right, you've got about 3.5 minutes to tell a story that gets at a universal human truth or feeling. But often, and in her case, it's often through a very specific story. And then the particular is how we get to the universal, right? And she says this, and I think this is good advice for people of faith. I'm still endlessly fascinated by people, by the human experience, by why people are the way they are, by the ways that they feel emotion. I think that's what keeps us connected. I think that's what keeps us connected. And this is about storytelling. It's about how we think about sharing the reason for the hope that we have, doing it with gentleness and respect, because when we connect with other people's humanity, we connect with that deep part of them that's longing. Because we all have that deep part of us that's longing. And then we invite each other into a good story. She also talks about timing, which I think is so important. And that some people, she talks about a particular kind of song and Reputation album, and she's like, it took people 6 years to come around to that. And that's okay. And I was just thinking about that as we walk with folks, and even in our own journeys, right? Sometimes it just takes a while for the story to really hit us. And that's okay that we don't know how it works. And I was thinking more about what this looks like now. What I used to think it looked like to tell a story, and what I think it looks like now. I think it looks like gentleness, and respect, and curiosity about people. I think it looks like stopping to help, even strangers. I was thinking about last week, I was with the middle schoolers, and we were looking at the passage that happens after the story of the road to Emmaus, where then they run back to Jerusalem, and they meet up with the other believers who are hiding in a room afraid. And they burst in and tell them, and then suddenly, who appears but Jesus Christ? Out of nowhere, they think he's a ghost. And the passage says that they were scared. And then it says, Luke says, they were wondering and questioning in the midst of their happiness. They were wondering and questioning in the midst of their happiness. And the students observed, they practiced hospitality to Jesus even though they were afraid. And they welcomed him and they gave him fish because Jesus was hungry. And they extended what they had, right? Even if it wasn't real. Like, they didn't know whether this was what was going on. But they welcomed him and they extended hospitality even though they were afraid. And I think this is sometimes what sharing our faith is like. Josh and Ari met with our seniors last week. And one of the things that they talked about was how faith can be kind of complicated in our current world. It can be complicated so often I think it looks like sharing faith that connect with ways people actually, what they're feeling at the deepest level, what they care about. Parker Palmer says, let your life speak. And I think about that, when the time is right, speak about your life. And that is giving a reason for the hope that we have. And so I think, in other words, you don't need to worry so much about trying to tell someone else's story or living someone else's life or like you're getting it right or being certain, but actually living the story that we live and that we want to tell. And so, of course, I also thought about Bad Bunny, who, going into the Super Bowl, like he knew the story he wanted to tell. It was very clear that he had a story. Like, he wasn't just going to get up there and sing some songs. He was going to take us through a journey. It was theater. It was theater, storytelling. And there was a beautiful, beautiful nature to all of that. So, like, live your actual life. Tell that story that you are wanting to tell. Richard Rohr says that St. Francis's original rule was simply live the gospel. Like, that's what he wanted for his followers to do, was just live the gospel. Just live it in your actual life. And faith breaks through in all kinds of ways. Not that we treat other people like targets or conversations like strategies, but just being real and just being ready for when and how God breaks through. And so often we don't know even how that is. And that's okay too. It's okay too. Let me go back to the bars. Because when I think about this story, I actually was living a story of generosity. Of living a story of like more than enough to share. And it was about more than just a nutty bar. He was also that friend who was there when it was not, like, it's socially risky to be my friend in middle school. It was not, he was like sharing some of his social capital with me. In a way that could have been hard. And to middle school Brad, that was good news. It was a friend I could count on when I couldn't always count on everybody else. And so I wonder today, what's the reason for the hope that you have? What does good news look like to you? Who has shared good news, whether that's sharing dessert or whether that's in your life, right? From hopelessness. What's your good story? Part of that is in what we read earlier, what Michelle read from John 14. Jesus says, I won't leave you alone. I won't leave you as orphans. I'll come to you. And because I live in you, will live, and you will know that I'm in my Father, you are me, and I'm in you. We live this interconnected life, and that is a beautiful story. It's a beautiful story. And so that's where we land today. It's pretty simple. Do not fear. Mountainside. Don't be afraid. In your hearts, set apart Christ as Lord. Be ready. And there's an opportunity to give a reason for the hope that you have. Because the risen Christ is our hope. That's powerful. Be gentle and respectful as we live this life. Live a good story. Live a good story. I love being part of a church that's full of so many good musicians, can you all come and